This morning. So we've got a great talk coming up now on how to run a national project. And we've got a host of speakers talking about the recent MACAFI study run through the Unite Collaborative and also the UK ROPE study, which has been mentioned already today. So we have Dr Andrew MacCormick and Dr Paul Jenkins, who are radiology trainees in Plymouth and the co-leads on the MACAFI study, which is the first Unite project. And then we have Dr Sachin Modi speaking afterwards. Dr. Modi was pivotal to the running of the UK ROPE study. He's a consultant interventional radiologist from Southampton. So I think Andy and Paul, you're going first, so over to you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Jim. So thank you for letting us come and talk about our experiences from the MACAFI study. Hopefully my video may come on, there you go. So can you all see my slides?
Yeah.
Brilliant, and hopefully they're moving on. So we wanted to talk about some of the main lessons that we learned from running the MACAFI study, which some of you may have heard of from the kind of advertising from IR Juniors and BSIR, and some of you may even have been collaborators on the study as well. So the MACAFI study was a multi-centre audit of the use of cholecystostomies within the UK and further interventions that happened after this. So this included kind of the patient selection for the cholecystostomies.
Andy, sorry to interrupt you. Do you want your slides on presenter mode? Because it's in the standard PowerPoint mode.
Is it moving? Okay, let's see. Has that worked there?
Yes, now, yeah, full screen.
There you go.
Thank you.
So the MACAFI study, we've tried to look at which patients are we selecting for cholecystostomies, and as well as this, kind of what investigations are they having, what interventions are they then having, and then what further investigations and procedures after they have the cholecystostomy put in, kind of are they having. So why did we want to do this? So this was mainly because the waiting lists for laparoscopic cholecystectomies is getting longer, and we recognised that the COVID pandemic was likely to make this even worse. So at our local trust, this is well over a year that you're waiting to have your gallbladder out. So we recognised that this is only going to continue to get worse afterwards. So there may be an increased reliance on a procedure which is cholecystostomy that has a relatively limited evidence base. So although there has been research into its safety and kind of technical success, what happens to these patients afterwards actually hasn't really been looked into in too much detail. The key problem is that a cholecystostomy is effectively just source control. So you're just removing the infected stuff within the gallbladder, and you're not actually able to sort out the underlying problem at the moment. So we kind of hypothesized that these patients would be bouncing in and out of hospital and having recurrent problems after this. And the patient cohort that's having cholecystostomies being kind of the elderly or the comorbid, we felt that the impact on their quality of life would be quite significant, having sometimes a drain in for the rest of their life that caused kind of constant problems after this. We also thought that from our very limited initial experience that there were quite wide differences in practice across the UK. So from talking to some of the other IR kind of trainees that Paul spoke to, we found that how much they're actually using cholecystostomies was vastly different in different hospitals. And we even recognised this within our own deanery. So the kind of larger hospitals, we're using them significantly more than the smaller hospitals. And we wanted to try and figure out why that was and what these other hospitals were doing instead. And one of the key things was we knew we weren't going to be able to answer every question with this project. We wanted to provide a snapshot of what we were doing in the UK at the moment and kind of why we were doing it. But we knew we wouldn't be able to say cholecystostomies are the best or the worst. So what we wanted this to be is a platform for other people and kind of other kind of groups to take this research forward and look into it in more detail and use kind of our project as a bit of a springboard, really. And another area that we wanted to look into was what can IR do that we're not currently doing in the UK? So this is something that I think is quite exciting, really, is the percutaneous interventions that have been done quite a lot in both America and in different parts of Asia, which is kind of the ability for interventional radiologists to access both the gallbladder and the biliary tree to kind of help these patients hopefully remove their current gallstones or remove common bile duct stones in a much safer way than undergoing something like an ERCP would be. So we felt this is something we're not doing in the UK at the moment. So could this be a platform to possibly encourage this kind of practice if this was possible logistically within IR? So we were really fortunate to have 36 centres sign up for this study, and we collected data from 1,200 patients who had undergone cholecystostomies within a 2-year period. This included more than 75,000 individual data points, which I'll touch on later, which whilst it was a very good thing, was administratively a very difficult thing. But that just highlighted the sheer amount of data that the excellent collaborators from all the different centres did collect for us. We had more than 100 collaborators from these 36 centres who participated to collect huge amounts of data that was really, really valuable when we came to analyse it. And this really wouldn't have been possible without the support that we had from, first of all, BSIR and the Trainee network, which was really valuable for, first of all, helping us come up with the project and tweak it, and then really getting the word out. IR Juniors and the Unite Collaborative were just of paramount importance, really, of spreading the word, getting people to sign up as collaborators and helping us at pretty much every step of the way. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now to talk about some of the key lessons that we learned initially from the project.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So Andy's taking us through the project. There were some really lessons, and I've just highlighted 3 of them from my perspective as to what we learned doing this project. The first one, I thought we'd just take a chance to review Lionel Messi. Handsome chap, isn't he? But in reality, what I was hoping to kind of highlight here, I don't know if many of you know this, but he's scored in every minute of the game apart from the first 2, in contrast to Ronaldo, who scored in every minute of the game. And you'd think that's a statistic worthy of a pub quiz, but actually it's got some reason behind it. And it's renowned that Lionel Messi actually spends the first 5, 10, even 15 minutes really trying to avoid the ball. And if you watch the games, you might notice this. And he spends most of his time analysing where the defenders are standing, thinking about what gaps they're leaving, what strengths they're exposing, and what weaknesses they're exposing. And really, this highlighted to me when I heard this. I thought about our project. Really, one of the things we did, and one of the things that we'd like to have done more, is perhaps more of the groundwork, more preparation work. We were quite thorough in our preparation and looking at sort of some of the weaknesses, analysing the kind of the way we were planning to do things. But actually, there's always more that could have been done. Preparation is never wasted. And actually, one of the lessons that we learned was more time in preparation, less time would have ended up with less time in dealing with the problems that you hadn't managed to anticipate. That comes with experience. But there we go, a lesson from Lionel Messi. Hopefully you can remember that one. We'll move on. I've got a bit of a sporting theme. So Team Sky, one of my favourite cycling teams. Hopefully you remember a couple of years ago when they were all dominant at the Tour de France, and with multiple riders who were sort of vying for the yellow jersey. There's 2 lessons that I think Team Sky bring to us that were really poignant in the MACAFI study, or what we've managed to do. And one of them is really the yellow jersey is won by the team, not just by the rider. There's the role of the domestique, the one who goes to the back, gets the water, brings it up to the rider, the one who goes out through the first couple of mountain ranges, absolutely kind of burns himself out, and then leaves it for the yellow jersey riders to take the claim. The unsung heroes, and I think there were lots of those when we look at MACAFI. The thousands, or not quite thousands, hopefully, I've got to put all their names in soon, but hundreds of collaborators, the people who did the hard work, and it's right to kind of recognise those, and really important to realise that it was a complete team effort. Having said that, there have been, there's people who do, the yellow jersey is one at the end, and we had that thing a while back with Chris Froome, Bradley Wiggins, and a couple of others kind of vying for the top. And I think it's really important to realise that yes, there is kind of some glory to be had. There is some kind of recognition to be had, but that competition that has got to be kept friendly. and it's actually the competition that is a healthy competition that drives you forward to be better and to do things better. So me and Andy have quite a good laugh, and we have quite a bit of a competition, but in a kind of very friendly way that drives us. And I wouldn't have been half as involved and half as enthusiastic about some of the research projects that we've been in if I hadn't had Andy going, oh, do you know what, I've managed to do this, or how about this? And it's a stimulus competition that says, let's get on, let's see if we can do better, not to do better than each other, but to do better for the sake of the ride, if you like. Moving on was my third and final sporting analogy. From over the summer, we saw the England heroics or failures, and it would be wrong not to mention Gareth Southgate. So the other lesson that we learned is to learn from failure. Many years ago, he missed the penalty that put Euro out of or put England out of the Euros, and years later, he's managing the England team in a completely different, much more collaborative, much more holistic way. And for us, there's some lessons that we've learned. Andy's going to take us through some of the detail of those lessons that we've learned. But I think don't let failure stop you. We've done some silly things in this, and we could easily have kind of sat down and been given up or kind of just thrown away that lot of data or said, we should have done it differently. But actually working through those failures, working through those experiences makes you stronger at the end. So we've learned from MACAFI, and we've got plans for other things, hopefully with the kind of IR juniors and Unite team and BSIR team. Looking forward, failures will come, paper rejections that have come already for us. But each one can make you stronger if it's taken with the right attitude. I'll hand back to Andy for a bit more specifics.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So what we wanted to go through is some of the kind of specific things that, as kind of a research team, that we learned from running the MACAFI project. And I think the first and probably the most interesting one is that multi-centre studies within IR in the UK are really, really doable. There haven't been that many. There's been a few, but very few that have been led by IR. And there is so much interest. Like, we were completely swamped with people trying to get involved. We had interest from pretty much every single big hospital in the UK, and we had tons of interest from abroad to get involved in this project as well, that we had to unfortunately turn down this time. But there is so much scope to do things, and radiology trainees, like, kind of quite typically tend to be quite keen to get involved in projects when they're set up and ready to go. And this is a really, really good platform to take forward these kind of projects. As Paul said quite a lot, the planning is so important. We did 80% of it really, really well for the MACAFI project, but we unfortunately didn't have the experience that we have now. So things that seemed really small back at the beginning of the project to plan really had a big impact on how much time it took us to tweak things. So I'll give you a very small example. And the first is that with the data collection kind of tool that we used, we allowed free text for a fair few of the boxes. And I told you before that we had 75,000 data points to go through. So you can imagine free text in 75,000 data points was just an utter nightmare to try and deal with. And me and Paul, no word of a lie, probably took over 100 hours each trying to just go through all of this data and assign a code to it. But some of it was unfortunately not really usable because, we couldn't tell what the person was trying to say. And therefore we lost quite a few bits of data, not significant amounts, but the additional time it took and the kind of loss of bits of data because of that, really, we could have made this much easier for ourselves if we had assigned better codes at the beginning or used a better database, which I'll touch on in a second. So having the infrastructure around us would have definitely made the process more streamlined. And by that, I don't mean millions of pounds worth of really fancy kit or really fancy softwares. I just mean having a base of people who have done it before and of, things like experienced research nurses who would have really helped us with this project. Like, having people like that in centres running these projects would have been so valuable for us. And that's something that I would definitely kind of encourage going forward, because these are the kind of people that have so much experience of doing these kind of projects that we just didn't have. And some of the ways that we made our life really difficult, they would have been able to go, well, why are you doing that? And would have ended up in a much better place because of that. And the support that we had to get the word out was one of the biggest successes, I think, in this project. So the support from IR juniors, the support from the Unite Collaborative, the support from BSIR, and like little things like their Twitter kind of reach and their network was so valuable to get people involved in this project. And that's something that going forward definitely would need to happen again. And these are the kind of three main people that were so helpful for us. But one of the key things, as much as, you know, we all advocate massively for IR taking real control of their research and IR leading these research projects, collaborating with other specialties was also really, really beneficial. So one of the big players in MACAFI was a consultant surgeon who had so much experience of research and was someone that we'd fostered a really good relationship with already. And having that was so valuable. So having that other specialties input, because at the moment, in the vast majority of hospitals within the UK, these patients are still being looked after solely by the surgeons. And the vast majority of IR patients in most hospitals in the UK are still being looked after predominantly on the wards by other specialties, especially during the inpatient setting. So getting these people on board, learning from their experience, getting their perspective on things, it's very difficult for me to comment on the use of lap choles and when we should be doing them or not, when I'm not a surgeon and I don't have that knowledge or experience. So having that person there to guide us and make sure that we're collecting all the right data was so valuable. And the more we do of these projects, the more efficient it will be. So I've touched on a fair few of the inefficiencies that we had. And these are things that I would be learning from straight away. So the number one thing is we used Excel spreadsheets to collect all the data effectively. And that was so difficult in every way. And there are so many databases that are very well kind of researched and very, very useful, like the RedCap software, that if we had to do a project again, I have no doubt that we would use one of them, and it would probably have saved, you know, me and Paul hundreds of hours and Jim hundreds of hours listening to me and Paul moaning about how much sifting through the data we were having to do. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is hopefully something to kind of inspire some of the people hopefully coming into radiology training in the coming years, is that junior trainees can have really leading roles in these projects. So I kind of led this with Paul and Jim during ST1, and, you know, coming into radiology training, especially as an ST1, you are very supernumerary in pretty much all training pathways, and you do feel a bit lost because you don't really know what you're doing, and everyone else is so much more competent at radiology than you are because it's so new to you. And I found having this project was, first of all, helped my knowledge and understanding of so many things, but also just gave me a real interest to focus on kind of alongside the radiology, because in ST1, there is very little kind of going on. You're almost always on a 9 till 5 rota. So there's lots and lots of time to take what can be really leading roles. So I'd encourage lots of people to get involved in these kind of projects, liaise with your IR consultants in your local hospitals, liaise with the BSIR network, Unite Collaborative, all these kind of teams, have a chat to the IR juniors guys. And there are lots of projects that are going to be in the pipeline that as junior trainees, you really can have leading roles in. So I'd like to invite any questions now. And I think Paul wants to say a little bit about one of the future projects that we've got kind of on the go now.
Yeah, so just to summarize that, I think I'm going to slightly be contentious, but you don't have to have a PhD to do research or to get involved with one of these projects. You know, I think having enthusiasm and having just an interest can spark kind of things going on. And I just encourage guys to come and get involved. We've got another project in the pipeline on splenic embolization that hopefully is going through, and look out for it and get involved if you can.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. I think we can, if we have time at the end, take some more questions with Dr. Modi as well. So if Dr. Modi, you're on the line, please feel free to share your slides if you have any. And thanks so much for joining us again. It's a very strong representation from Team Southampton today, showing all the academic work that's happening there.
Thank you, Jim, for the invitation. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, not in present mode yet. Yes, it is. Perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks, Jim, for the invitation. My name's Sachin Modi. I'm the interventional radiologist at Southampton here in the UK. And I'm going to talk to you about the UK ROPE study, which was run out of Southampton. So for those of you that don't know, UK ROPE stands for Registry of Prostate Artery Embolization, and ultimately it's led to a nice guidance, allowing prostate artery embolization to be performed in the UK. So this study, how was it done? So actually it started from my colleague, Nigel Hacking, who, the story goes, went to our local urologists here at Southampton and said to them that they basically had nothing to lose with getting involved in prostate artery embolization. I think he said to them that if it's proved to be successful, then they'll be famous, and if they disprove that it's successful, they'll also be famous. And with that, he got them on board. And I think that I'll echo some of the points made by the previous guys, that collaboration with associated specialties is very important and adds weight behind these projects. We're often criticized in IR for sort of lack of research basis for some of the procedures we do. And I think collaboration with other specialties can only help that. So essentially they applied to the new interventions committee, who they insisted that NICE were involved. This is to perform prostate artery embolization in the UK. NICE were informed and they were encouraged to set up a pilot study. This is before I joined Southampton. And we had industry funding for 20 patients from Cook Medical, and they funded all the sort of the aspects of the procedure. Nigel Hacking and Tim Bryant were trained in Lisbon and were proctored for these cases. And essentially this was approved and submitted to NICE, and it was published in BGOI in 2014. And then Dr. Hacking approached BSIR and BAUS, which is the British Association of Urological Surgeons, about running a research study to evaluate prostate artery embolization. So in the 2013 NICE guidance, they recommended PAE as a research-only classification. And after Nigel met with the various representatives from the different governing bodies, they had a meeting with NICE, and they quickly agreed to fund and run a registry to produce a report. And this was going to be independently done, so it wasn't subject to any particular bias from any particular hospital or centre. So tenders were sent out, and the CEDAR research unit in Cardiff was successful. There was industry support from Cook Medical, and these were based on our previous experience at Southampton. So in terms of involvement, Nigel chaired the protocol committee. We had our urologist from here in Southampton, and someone called Dr. Alistair Ray, who's a researcher, was appointed by CEDAR as a project manager. Nigel got grants from BSIR and BAUS, and we had an online database which was hosted by Dendrite, which is similar to the REDCap that was mentioned. And this was really important, really well kept data set, and was very, very useful subsequently, which we'll come on to. So the steering committee then put out invitations to IR and urology teams across the UK for expressions of interest, sent us out to demonstrate that they had experience in embolization, and they had training and proctoring as needed. So eventually, when it got all approved, it was a national multi-center trial with ethical approval. It was on the NIHR clinical portfolio, which meant that we had research nurses, and this was very important. Lots of data to collect, questionnaires to give out. Practically, as in, we don't necessarily have time to fulfill all these duties. This is a trial that was run very much by clinicians rather than researchers. And, we definitely needed the nurses to help us achieve this. So centres were proctored, and there were 17 study sites across the UK. The first patient was entered in 2014, and the study closed in 2016. And the primary endpoint was 12 months IPSS, which is the International Prostate Symptom Severity Score. So once it was done, we had an amendment to the NICE guidelines in 2018, which said that PAE was now permitted under normal or standard conditions. And now, as you may well know, in your centres, it's officially considered an acceptable first-line treatment for BPH. So there were 17 centres. really important collaboration between IRs up and down the country, collaboration between urologists up and down the country. Each centre had a PI, which was a urologist and an IR. The chief investigator was Dr. Karen Rees from CEDA. Nigel was the clinical IR lead, and Mark Speakman was the urology lead. And we kept the BSIR and BAUS informed of progress twice a year. So it was a postal questionnaire, which is unlike any other study, so less open to investigator bias. We over-reported retrograde ejaculation, and this was something that the guys mentioned before. It's really important to get the protocol right. In hindsight, we weren't able to make any further amendments to the protocol or interview our patients directly about these symptoms. So actually in the ROPE study, we over-reported retrograde ejaculation because a lot of these patients were taking medication for which retrograde ejaculation is a recognized side effect, but it was very difficult for us to alter this afterwards. So this is like a summary of what happens. We had a pilot study in Southampton, which was funded by Cook Medical, which led to NICE calling for further research or an appropriate registry. And a registry really is a sort of real world look at data. You know, it's very difficult and expensive to run clinical trials. So a registry is a sort of more real world approach where realistically we can gather data, collaborate between different centers and get information that we need. And in this case, ultimately we got a procedure to be approved by NICE, which was really significant. So the strengths of this study is multi-center, funded by multiple stakeholders, so everyone's involved, everyone's driven to make this work, had a non-inferiority design, independent center in Cardiff to run it, reduced bias by postal questionnaires, and we reported it directly to NICE, and then we subsequently have now published the multiple secondary endpoints. So we collected a huge amount of data on this database, which was very easy to download and use, unlike Excel spreadsheets, as they mentioned earlier. And, you know, that's really important. You know, it's all very well collecting lots and lots of data, but it's really important to speak to a stats person to make sure that we're collecting the right data in all of these multi-center trials so that they have some sort of use in order to be presented and published later. And my colleague, Dr. Drew McLean, who's recently been appointed as a consultant here at Southampton, you know, he really has flogged this dendrite database to the end. I mean, he's got multiple publications on various different aspects of prostate artery embolization based on this database. So it's really was very useful. Weaknesses, so it's non-randomized. There was a learning curve for all centers. So centers were early in their prostate artery embolization, which maybe affected the outcome. But nonetheless, it was a very well-run study, and obviously the outcome was significant. So this is the final publication, which was published in BGOI in 2018. It was the most downloaded paper in 2018. You can see here that actually this study was very much, we don't get to interventional radiology to here, Tim Bryant. It was very much run by Alistair Reyes from CEDA. Then we've got John Powless from NICE, urologist, stats guy, urologist, IR. So, and you can see that, you know, we published this deliberately in a urology journal to sort of increase the impact. And it was very much, although IR was the driving force behind it, the collaboration with all these other centers is what made it happen. So this is the final publication. I won't go into the details of the outcomes of the study, but essentially these slides here will summarize that we had 305 patients, 216 underwent PAE, 89 underwent TERP, and essentially the IPSS score was improved in both groups. And these are the complications. So, you know, overall, I'll say that you know, this was an excellent, well-run study, lots of hard work. Wouldn't have been possible without Nigel Hacking's drive and determination and ability to collaborate with lots of different people up and down the country and the urologists here at Southampton. And, you know, ultimately it led to a procedure being approved by NICE so that we can all perform it for the betterment of patients. And I think that's what research is about. And these studies, although difficult, are possible. And I think registry studies in the real world that we live in, with the difficulties we have with funding and time, I think are a practical way to get data and to evaluate procedures. So, I think it's something that we should entertain going forward. Happy to take any questions. Thanks once again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Modi, for that fantastic talk. Really useful to know the practicalities of how to get one of these national studies up and running, and to Andrew and Paul, all the trials and tribulations of running a national study. I'll probably have time for one question.
Yeah, we've got one here. I think Sachin and Andrew and Paul, thanks for your talks. But I know for the UK ROPE study, I think Drew McLean and Ganesh mentioned earlier their involvement in it as well. Well, how would you describe the registrar's role in getting this sort of project off the ground, and what do you look for in a trainee to sort of say, well, this person would be right to help you out for this kind of study?
So in terms of this study, there were registrars involved in the initial concepts of the study, and subsequently they have been involved heavily in analysing the data and publishing subsequent studies, which is great for them, great for us. I guess, when I see lots of trainees that come through and they come to me asking for a project to be involved in. And what I really want to see is that those trainees have got something about them, that they're keen, they're gonna follow through with their suggestions and get stuff done. And I think that's the main thing. I think that that there's always pressures at work to do things, other things going on. But I think if you want to be involved in research, you have to dedicate the time to it. You yourself, Shia, know these things can be painstaking sometimes, to data collection and things like that. But it is worth it in the end.
Brilliant. Thanks again to all three speakers. I think we're going to have to move on to the next session, and really appreciate your time.